Welcome to Revival Waves of Glory Ministries. I'm your host, and today we're doing a deep dive into the incredible story of a modern spiritual movement, the Litchfield Revival. It's a story of a meteoric rise, an unbelievable peak, and a really dramatic collapse. Our guide for this journey is the book The Litchfield Revival by Bill Vincent, who gives us a powerful firsthand account of everything that went down. The author, Bill Vincent, kicks things off with this description. Just imagine that for a second. Walking into a room so full of anticipation that you can literally feel it humming in the air. That's the atmosphere he paints for us in the small town of Litchfield, Illinois, back around 2008. It really sets the stage for the wild story we're about to get into.
So here's how we're going to walk through this incredible story, basically in 4 acts. First, we're going to look at the very beginning, the spark of revival, and how this whole thing got started. Then we'll move to its peak, the height of glory, a time of just unbelievable miracles. After that, we'll get to the turn, what the book calls the scaffold of warning. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the lessons and legacy, what was left when the dust settled.
Okay, let's get right into it. Every big fire starts with a tiny spark. And the Litchfield Revival, well, its origin story starts in the most humble, unassuming way you can imagine.
So you got to understand, this didn't just pop up overnight. The seeds were actually planted way back in 2004 with this small gathering in a house called the School of the Spirit. We're talking just a handful of people. But the real catalyst, the thing that poured gasoline on the fire, was a trip they took in early 2008. They went down to another big revival happening in Lakeland, Florida, and whatever happened there, it was like a match was lit. When they got back, the movement in Litchfield just exploded, and they quickly outgrew the house and had to move into a bigger building.
And what's so fascinating is that the author makes it clear this didn't start with some anonymous crowd. He says it all began with 12 specific people. He calls the 12 hearts. And look at this mix. A single mom, a retired pastor, a college kid, someone who'd overcome addiction. A really diverse group. But the one thing we all had in common was this intense, deep hunger for a real spiritual awakening. They were the engine that got this whole thing started.
Now, that trip to Florida, it's a huge deal in this story. The author doesn't just say they were inspired. He uses a very specific word, impartation. The idea is that they didn't just see a revival. They believed they received a spiritual transfer of its fire. It's like they came back to Litchfield feeling like they were carrying the same power for supernatural signs and wonders, and they were ready to unleash it in their own town.
And that brings us to the next chapter, what the author calls the movement's peak. After that Florida trip, things just went to a whole other level. The revival became known for this constant stream of supernatural events, and it started drawing people from all over the country.
So what are we talking about here? Well, the book lists some absolutely incredible things. There was gold dust, reportedly appearing out of thin air, covering Bibles, people's hair, even the pulpit, gemstones that would apparently just materialize, sometimes even flying across the room. People reported getting divine dental work, gold fillings suddenly appearing in their teeth, and some of this was even documented with photos. And maybe the wildest of all, crisp $100 bills and piles of coins just materializing.
And to show this wasn't just some vague thing, the author shares these really vivid, specific stories. Like this one, about a woman with terrible back pain. She falls to the floor during worship. And the book says people nearby could actually hear her spine audibly snap, crack, and pop as it realigned. They believed it was a miraculous healing right then and there. Can you imagine witnessing that?
And you might be thinking, okay, a few amazing stories. But no. According to the author, these were not isolated incidents. The ministry actually documented over 1,000 testimonies of what he calls creative miracles. We're talking everything from cancers disappearing to blind people seeing and deaf people hearing. The sheer volume of these reports is what built the revival's powerful reputation.
So when you have this much happening, people start to notice. Big names start to notice. The author talks about a visit from a well-known evangelist, David Herzog. And when Herzog showed up, his reaction wasn't to try and lead, but to basically say, wow. He reportedly told them, it seems like you've already obtained the spirit of revival. That's a huge validation, signaling this little movement was now on the map. So this is the peak. It's incredible. The energy is off the charts. But, and this is a big but, according to the author, even as things were at their absolute zenith, a dramatic shift was about to happen. The story pivots from this amazing high point to a place of serious warning. And by the way, if you want to find out more about Bill Vincent's ministry today, you can check out revivalwavesofgloryministries.com. The turning point in this whole narrative comes down to a prophetic vision the author says he received. He describes seeing the core members of the revival standing on this huge scaffold, way up in the sky, symbolizing their high spiritual state. But then, he just watched in horror as, one by one, they started to fall. This vision is presented as a chilling warning that a great collapse was coming. So what caused this fall? The author points his finger at something he calls a spirit of control. Another term sometimes used for this in these circles is a Jezebel spirit. Now, this isn't about blaming a specific person, but about a spiritual influence that he says began to creep in. An influence that valued rigid, human-led order way more than the spontaneous, free-flowing movement that started it all.
And you can really see the difference here. It's pretty stark. On one side, you have the original flow of the Spirit. Worship could go for hours, totally spontaneous. Miracles like gemstones were personal. Kids were right there in the mix. But then, under what he calls the spirit of control, things changed. Services had to end by 10 p.m. sharp. The gemstones and gold were now collected by the leadership. And the children? They were removed from the main service. The free flow is being choked out by a rigid human agenda.
This all comes to a head in a way that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. The author says he got a direct command from God that just said, "Go now." And he didn't hesitate. He describes grabbing a single box of his clothes, running out a side door, and leaving almost everything else behind. And this apparently led to a literal high-speed chase, with other ministry members chasing his van down the interstate. He frames it not as just leaving a church, but as escaping what he now saw as a system of spiritual abuse.
Wow. So after a story with a rise that high and a fall that dramatic, what's left? What do you take away from it all? Well, according to the book, the experience, though painful, left behind some really powerful lessons. And this is really key. The book doesn't frame this as just a sad failure. It's called a scaffold of warning. Each mistake became a powerful lesson. The pride and complacency that crept in, that taught them that real revival demands humility and that constant spiritual hunger. The lack of discernment, a hard lesson that not everything supernatural is necessarily holy. The spirit of control showed them that obedience to God is always better than human order. And the disunity? Well, it proved that a house divided really cannot stand.
So, at the end of the day, what's the bottom line? The author's main takeaways are all about character. He stresses that the most important parts of a sustainable spiritual movement aren't the flashy signs and wonders. It's the internal stuff: personal holiness, integrity, guarding your heart against pride, and having that radical obedience to God's voice, even when it's hard. He concludes that true revival is ultimately about changed hearts, not just a big show. And that really leaves us with this huge, thought-provoking question. The author seems to believe that this same divine fire is out there, just waiting to be fanned into flame again. But the story of Litchfield makes you wonder, is this intense cycle of an amazing rise and a devastating collapse just an inevitable part of these powerful spiritual movements? Or is it possible to sustain that initial fire without getting burned? It's a question the story leaves us with. To explore more, please visit revivalwavesofgloryministries.com. Thank you so much for listening to the Deep Dive podcast.